All right, we're live.
Okay, cool. So we've been setting up an agenda. This is the content, example content in core meeting. I suppose I should give it a date. It's on, what is today's date? October 18th, 2016. So the items I added to the agenda are the content model. We could talk a little bit about assets because I found some interesting resources that we could use, and Keith also has generously offered to help in providing both assets and written content. Then there's an issue around field group that came up as I was playing around with the content model itself. And then there's I've put in here process, which is like, how are we gonna, what's our process for like tackling things going to be, etc. Do those sound pretty good to everybody?
Yeah, and I also wanted to just give an update on the ideas queue and also a sprint happening next week.
So, okay, hold on, let me add this. So ideas queue.
And
what was the other one?
That's exciting.
Yeah, sprint next week.
Okay. Okay, cool. So, were there any other agenda items anybody else wanted to add, or?
Sounds like that's probably a lot.
Yeah, well, that's a lot to cover.
Sorry, Keith, what were you saying?
I guess it might tie in with ideas, but just overall goals. I think that came up in one of the recent UX meetings, just making sure the top level goals are clear.
Yeah. That's a good point. Maybe we should start with that one, actually, because I think we were all pretty much in alignment in the Dublin meeting, but not everybody was in that meeting. So if I can sort of from memory try to recap what we said were the goals in Dublin, it was, so we want to get example content into core in an experimental way, because the user's experience right now in core when they install Drupal is you haven't created anything yet, which is kind of bare and empty, and it doesn't give it both doesn't demo Drupal very well, and it also doesn't give the user anything to go on in terms of what Drupal can do or demonstrating what Drupal's capabilities are. So for both of those reasons, we want to put some example content into a profile, an experimental profile in Drupal core, with the example content being following the content model of the user guide that's already been established with the farmer's market, because why reinvent the wheel? And the goal is to both have something that demonstrates Drupal out of the box in a more sort of dynamic and exciting way, and shows all the things that Drupal is capable of, and then also to be examples that users can sort of look to when they want to sort of see how somebody else did something, like create a view, create an entity reference, create a custom block, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the more examples of that are there, the better that they will be for illustrating some of those concepts. Does anybody have anything to add?
Yeah, Laurie also came to the meeting, and he felt that this aligned well with the plan to add a new user-facing theme to core as well, because it would give a tighter scope, and as you said before, would also allow people to see how you can create your own theme with Drupal and what it could look like.
Yeah, which is going to be a really excellent, sort of synergy, between the two groups working together, because we'll give them content that they can theme, and then they'll give us feedback on, providing possibly tweaks or changes to that as we go along. We'll work in tandem with them, hopefully. Did anybody have anything to add to that, or Any questions or concerns about it?
Yeah, I
Yes.
mean, the only thing to add, sorry,
Go ahead.
was that we were going to try and take this lean approach that we've been using for other things. So like experimental profile, focus on getting something and iterating from there. So the content model may not be perfect to start with, for example, or we might add to it or make it more generic as time goes by, so that there are parts that can be reused.
Right, totally. Okay, so
I guess just two things for me. One is that sounds like a lot of coordination with a lot of different teams and people. And I guess one thing I'd be a little bit concerned of is like, unless all those people are super aligned, which I guess is what these calls are for, that could slow all of the initiatives down. So you might just want to be careful there and look for opportunities to move in parallel instead of sequentially or whatever. And I guess the second thing is, are those goals articulated anywhere in the ideas queue? Because I think that kind of context is really helpful for people to understand why we want to prioritize this and, why they want to help with it and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think I have all of those goals clearly captured in the issue that I created for the add example content to experimental install profile. So in terms of just queue gardening, what I did earlier today for everybody who has seen some of these issues, but not necessarily all of them, is that Lowry had created the add experimental install profile issue, and I had created the add experimental content with an install profile. And so what I did was I made the add experimental content a child of the add experimental install profile child issue, and I also made the add new theme a child of the add experimental install profile module. So that's the parent of everything, because it's a dependency of everything, so it kind of made sense. Then I also cross-linked your sandbox, Lee, that you created to the add example content to experimental install profile. This is the hold on one second. This is the add experimental install profile or experimental content issue right here. So that's for people who are listening to issue 2816775. The create experimental install profile issue is this one, which is 2809635. So I think, like I said, I think all that stuff is captured. All the goals are captured in the. And if they're not, I'll sort of expand on this issue summary to capture them. Actually, it is a little thin in the issue summary right now, so I'll actually expand that to Angie to really clearly spell out what the goals are.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, that feeds back into the ideas meeting tomorrow. Oh, sorry, tomorrow in my time zone, 2 days in your time zone. On Thursday, Alex Pott, I spoke with him this morning, and he said that, correct me if I'm wrong, Angie, that you guys are meeting on Thursday to go over the issue queue and just over the ideas issue queue.
We have a meeting set up to do that. I don't know that our first meeting is going to be super productive. It's probably going to be a lot of how we're going to do this. I don't know.
Yes.
You know what I mean? But yeah, the idea is every 2 weeks on Thursday afternoons Pacific time, evenings Europe, and God knows what time. Well, this time, whatever time this is in Australia.
7 a.m. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's actually earlier than this call, though, unfortunately. But yeah, that's the idea. Is we would have time set aside. And it would be also on Google Hangouts Lives. We would be recording them so other people could kind of get an idea of like our thought process and stuff. But I have to warn you, I have no expectations about this first meeting. It's probably just going to be a lot of questions, more questions than answers, I think. But the idea is that over time we get good at this, and we can sort of sift through the queue in a certain order, and make sure people's ideas are getting processed and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Cool. So, all right. So the thing that will probably come up in that meeting, if you do get to that, will be just the experimental install profile idea itself. Am I guessing right, or maybe do you not think you'll get that far?
I think it would be helpful if whatever is the most important issue for us to look at is marked needs review at least, and maybe major. Because right now there's like 6 or 7 issues that I know about, or maybe not that many, but there's at least 4. So if you have something that's like ready for core committers, like framework managers, product managers to review, that would be helpful to know.
Okay.
Otherwise,
Okay, well,
I don't know what
one.
order we're going to process things in. It might be first in, first out. It might be, I'm not really sure off the top of my head, but if you have suggestions, I'm happy to take them.
I think Lee was going to suggest something.
Yeah, if you're going to add the goals to the issue summary, and I've updated it to major and needs review as per your recommendation there. From our point of view, I think I speak for everyone when I say that that would be the one. If we had to pick one to get some feedback on, or at least a yes, it's viable, or let's investigate it more, that'd be that one, I think. Right?
Yeah.
Cool. And I guess if that has broad-based consensus from everyone on this call or everyone who was at the meeting, maybe mark it RTBC, or we need something to call it out from the rest of the issue. So right now, everything in that queue is just a complete mess. We need some kind of a thing that's like, this is actually ready for core committers to look at it. We use RTBC and other queues for that, so I was thinking we could use it here as well.
Right. So is there anything technical that needs to be done for the experimental install profile to be, I guess, quote, committed? I mean, you know, is it?
We wouldn't be committing it. We would be saying, yep, that sounds like a good idea. And then moving it to the core queue. And then the core queue would go through the core queue process.
Right, right. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think, like, I think we should. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, the main thing is just to get some indication from the core product managers and framework managers that if you're going to spend some time on this, it has a good chance of eventually coming to fruition. That's all we're really looking for at this stage, right?
Yep. That makes sense.
Cool.
So I've put it to needs review. If you want to move it to RTBC, Kevin, just to say that, you know, we agree on this approach as our first step or something like that. I don't know.
Sure.
That sounds great. Thank you. I gave you a spoiler alert that I think it's a great idea, but I do not know what the framework managers are going to say about it, so want to give them a chance to respond first.
Yeah.
So next item on the agenda is the content model.
Yeah. So I have this document that I've been sort of messing around with, and I just added a little bit more onto it today. It's a Google Doc. I probably need to change the. It's here. Probably need to change the permission to all to anybody. Oh no, it says anybody with the link can edit. Okay, cool. So I've been going kind of back and forth on things, and you know, Lee made some really good suggestions about. I wanted to add a product content type because I didn't think that, you know, that just what was in the you know, the farmers market scenario was sufficient to like look like a real site, but there's quite a lot in there just with the vendors and the recipes and everything. So if you scroll to the bottom of this document, that's sort of my latest kind of swag at the model, and it maps pretty closely to the you know, to what's in the actual the guide and the tasks that are involved in the guide. But the things that the couple of things that it brings up are, first question is, when we have vendor, should we make vendor just a content type that is unique to vendors, or should we make vendor a generic content type like organization that has a taxonomy term of vendor, and then other people could have add other terms to that, like service provider, any other different kind of organization, nonprofit, whatever, so that that becomes a more extensible thing. And the thinking behind that is that some people, even no matter how much we want this to be sort of an example content demonstration of Drupal and a way that people sort of either are introduced to Drupal and what it can do, or learn a little bit more about how to use it. Some people are going to inevitably take this and actually just run with it as their install that they start adding onto to really create an actual site. So we probably want to sort of hedge against that, being crufty by creating things that are a little more generic or universal and reusable. Does that make sense?
Well, I think the vendor one is a good one, because I think if there is, I think we should, if we could have some sort of, I'm trying to think of the word, but basically, gate that says, okay, are we being too generic just for generic sake, or are we being generic because we think that there could be a future use case in this scenario? So for example, the vendor one, I could see a scenario where all of a sudden the market started having sponsors, and they wanted the sponsors to be listed in the footer with their logos. So, that would be a use case for the vendor or for the organization with a taxonomy term of sponsor. You know what I mean? So I think if you could see a use for it in the current scenario, then I think that would be worthwhile. I think if we were being generic for generic sake, then we might find that we're biting off too much at the very start. But I think if we could use that kind of as a guiding principle, maybe.
That seems pretty sensible to me. Yeah, that seems like a good rule of thumb. So if it makes sense that somebody might pick up this model because it is pretty close to what they want to do, we want to make it extensible from that point forward, but not backwards into every possible different kind of site that you could ever make.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
I think that this makes sense in context of the user guide too, because in the documentation we can kind of articulate, like, we intentionally made this generic so that we could be forward thinking, and that helps to instruct people that this is something that they should be considering when they're creating their content model as well, as not just what do I need right now today, but what might I need in the future.
Oh yeah. That's a really good point. I didn't even
I've had a dollar for every site I audited where you could see that they hadn't had that, and then ended up with 3 content types that basically had the same fields on them. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Cool. So it sounds like we're pretty much in agreement on that. So that it's an organization content type with a taxonomy term of vendor, or with a taxonomy term field with vendor. And one of the things that I did in this sort of like in the local sandbox that I've been building is that I when I went through and I started actually making these and looking at how they looked at on the screen and how they felt to me, is I added vendor to the description of the content type. So it kind of goes like organization, and then its description says something along the lines of, use this when creating a profile of an organization, such as a vendor or a blah 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 or a blah blah blah, so that it's like, so that vendor is in there somewhere, so that it's not like completely opaque to people when they see organization and they want to create a new vendor. That seemed like a good way to approach that.
Yeah, that's for the love of content editors. There's something that, there's a session from Pam from about 3 years ago at Prague. It's just talking about that stuff: help text on fields, help text on content types, so forth. Yeah. Cool.
So the second kind of thing that came up when I went through the my own sort of process of trying to build this out locally was that when we get into recipe, we hit a real snag. And the snag is that what I want to do with recipe is that I want, particularly if I have a bunch of recipes that are being created by a bunch of different people, this is almost like, in a sense, this concept is almost kind of like a two-way marketplace, even though it's not really a two-way marketplace. It's like, it's the skeleton of a two-way marketplace, because you have all these vendors and each of them can be creating recipes, of their own. But the snag that I hit is that you probably want the recipe ingredients to be a vocabulary of terms that people can reuse. So I might have, like, turnips, potatoes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, when they're listed out in the actual recipe itself, they require amounts. So they can't be a taxonomy term reference, because they need to have essentially two parts to the fields. They need the term, whatever it is, so it's flour, but then they also need the amount, 1 cup of flour, and they also need the amount with the specific units. I mean, these could all just be text fields, but that seems to me like that's not the way we do structured content. And that if we really want to show the people, down to the most granular level, how to do structured content correctly, then we might want to have, even though it's not in core right now, some kind of a compound field.
Yeah, it sounds to me like we need an intermediate entity and an inline entity form. And I'm pretty sure that inline entity form is a generic enough building block that lots of people would be happy to have it in core. And that kind of highlights its worth. But yeah, if you had another intermediate entity that was made up of those fields and the reference, and then inline entity form would make creation of that easier. In the same way as, a line item on a commerce order is made up of a product reference and a quantity.
Right. So with inline entity form, can inline entity form behave like a multi-value field? Because this needs to be multi-value as well. That's the other
it does.
part of it.
Yeah, so like it's essentially an entity reference field, and so the widget is provided by inline entity form, and it has a button that says create new or use existing. And so if you have an existing entity that is 3 cups of potato, you can search for that. But if you need to create a new line item that is 3 cups of potato, you hit create new, and then it gives you the form for that recipe line item, and it has those fields in it. Yeah. I mean, there's other modules you can do it with, field collection, paragraphs, but I think inline entity form is the truest to Drupal's content model insofar as it uses entity references and entities.
Right. So that I mean, I would be all for going that direction. I think it's kind of like something that Drupal has really needed anyway, but we're kind of tying another sort of add this other thing into.
So I think that probably should be a longer term thing. If we want to have that lean approach, and we should do something intermediate in the meantime. So I guess questions for Joe is how you saw the recipe working in a user guide, and maybe that's the first iteration, and then and we create this at the same time another issue in the ideas queue about adding inline entity form to core.
I think the big thing for the user guide implication here is that we're trying to stick to things that you could build using core only in the user guide, but I think that would be the case for this install profile as well. I think Kevin makes a really good point about listing that the thing contains carrots is only moderately useful, and in the interest of making the documentation tell a realistic story, I think we would be totally up for making changes to the user guide in the future once it's possible to do that in core.
Yeah.
So what about if in the first instance it's an entity reference field multi-value that just references the ingredients, and then there's a text area field we're going to have a text area field for the method anyway, and that could also list out the quantities, for example. So at least there's linking, but it's not as elegant as would be possible with Contrib.
So when I messed around with it locally, what I kind of landed on, as a kind of a compromise solution, without putting in a different, another Contrib module or anything like that, was make the ingredients listings, the ingredients and quantities listings themselves, just a multi-value text areas. So you could just write in, 2 cups of flour, 1 cup of sugar, blah 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 blah, and continuously add, additional ingredients if you wanted to. But then adding another field at the end for like key ingredients, like tags, like you would tag an article. So tagging it with key ingredients so other people can find. And again, if we label it in such a way that we say, tag this recipe with the most important ingredients so other people can find it when they hunt for it.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I think that works well with the user guide scenario too, because we sort of imagined it as someone visiting the site, you just bought a bunch of carrots and now you want to find recipes. But you're probably realistically only going to do that for some of the major ingredients you buy and not some silly esoteric, like, I have 1 tablespoon of vanilla. What should I make with that?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. It's like, I want recipes for chicken, and I want recipes that happen to include turmeric.
You wouldn't put salt, for example. Yeah.
Nice.
All right, cool. So those are really only the kind of like outstanding questions that I had around the model itself. I mean, anybody who wants to like actually add or edit this Google Doc with the stuff in it can just dive in and like, because I'm sure I probably like, there's things that I'm not thinking of. But I think we could go on to the next agenda item, what was that? Oh yeah, so we covered content model. Field group, we actually skipped ahead to the field group thing. And we actually already did talk a little about the ideas queue. I just wanted to mention the assets thing is just, I wanted to mention that there's some interesting, one of the issues that we've run into in the past at Acquia with creating demo sites is getting visual assets that are open source. So I found a really good source for fully what do you call it? It's not public domain. There's a specific like Creative Commons 0, I think it's called. Like Creative Commons with no caveats on it, no attribution or anything like that. And that's here. And I actually already went through and I found a whole bunch of of really good food photography that's CC0 license that we can use. So I'm going to put that. I have that all locally in a folder, and I can. But it would be great if we had some kind of like bucket that I could throw that into that we could all share. Does anybody have like an S3 account or something like that?
But what about the Google Drive that the UX team has?
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. We could just throw them in there. I could just create a new directory in there and put them in. All right, let me look at that. Let me look into that, and I'll and then if I'm able to get them in there, then I'll share them. Now, also, Keith, you said you have possibly some photographer time that you could possibly devote as well to doing some sort of custom stuff.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a couple of photographers that we work with regularly who can help out for sure. They'd be more than up for that. And copywriting as well. If you want us to dive in there and help out, that's something we can get behind.
Awesome. That would be cool.
theming, design, all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So you probably, in terms of the design side, you probably want to talk to Lowry and sort of join in that meeting in the sort of theming side. But because here we're just talking about the content itself.
Yep.
But yeah. So I think maybe, tell me what you think about this, Keith. But I think that the design, or that the photography stuff is going to flow out of the copywriting, probably, right? Because we have the model now. We need, the copywriter is going to have to sort of start imagining things about how this all sort of hangs together in a kind of realistic way, and then out of that, that's going to probably suggest some visual assets that we want to have to accompany that. So does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I think so. I think we want this thing to inspire, and to be as convincing as we can make it, I think. And it's showing off the capability of Drupal, isn't it? Drupal core is helping people on board, and if we can make sure that the content is as engaging as we can make it, then that's going to be a big win. It's so much easier to design around great assets, whether it's the copy, inspiring some of the kind of maybe some of the sort of layouts on the page, and just great photography that ties in directly with that as well. So obviously you've got the recipes thing that we need to think about.
So maybe as like a first step on that, we could just do a as a tone exercise, like the kind of introductory sort of homepage, as a sort of let's start the ball rolling on the actual content itself by like just sort of describing the market and talking about the history and and just kind of it sets the tone for like the sort of brand and kind of feel of this thing. And then once we start to get into the individual vendors and recipes, it all kind of flows out of that. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I haven't made my way all the way through the guide yet, so I need to finish that off. But definitely we need to understand the scene we're setting, don't we? And if the guide isn't delivering that part of it yet in any way, then that's the place to start, as you say.
Yeah. So for those who do, so Keith and I had a really, really interesting discussion in a bar in Dublin, drinking pints of Guinness, and
Surprise.
one of the things. So when I found out that he was interested in helping to actually produce the example content itself, I was like, well, that's awesome. We can make it be to have the market actually based in Britain, which since you're there, which kind of makes it gives it a kind of sense of place, but it also really neatly puts it sort of both in the English speaking world and then also in Europe, kind of bridging that gap also in a way that I think is kind of cool. Even though some of you don't want to be in Europe anymore, but we'll set that aside.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up.
We've actually got fairly large farmers markets here because a lot of Australia's produce is grown in this region. So if you do actually need photos or real stalls or anything like that, go to that and sort of provide stuff as well if you like.
Cool. Definitely. Yeah. And any assets I think would be helpful. Definitely. I was just thinking that if Keith's got a photographer local to him who wants to go out, and where are you? You're in.
Yeah, we're near to Winchester, so we've got there's quite a regular farmers market down that way. I think there's one up in Newbury as well. That's not a bad looking square, I suppose. Yeah, so it's kind of the whole settings as well, isn't it? I guess that would be the place to start, is just trying out a couple of trial shoots and seeing how things kind of come out, really. Just do a bit of experimentation initially.
Yeah.
And sharing the results of that, that would be a good place to start. best looking stuff wins, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
We want this just to look as good as possible, you know.
Yeah, totally. So, so that sounds like that's kind of two tasks. Maybe we can. Do we want to make those actual stories in the sandbox? So this kind of, we're kind of verging into process here. I don't know what other people think about kind of process. So keep, just FYI for you. So one of the things that Lee did is he set up a sandbox project on Drupal.org that has already got a bunch of open issues. And the issues are like, basically the open issues are right now are around creating the content model. And some of them are a little bit more technical around, you know, sort of the underlying mechanics of getting the install profile itself together.
Right.
But perhaps we should just use that queue to actually put content creation issues in it as well. Does that make sense, or do you think we should do that and do the content creation stuff in a separate place?
I think we should do it in the one spot, just personally because we want to end up with it in the code, so that it can be imported anyway. But if you want to like work on it in, you know, like a doc, Google Doc somewhere or whatever, but you know, if we just at least have an issue in the queue that says we're working on content for X and it's being worked on here and link off somewhere, at least there's some discovery then. And you know, the actual typing, obviously you would want to be doing it in the issue queue, but you know, if it was, at least if people wanted to help, they knew they could jump in the queue, find the story that they're interested in.
Yeah. So one thing I think that that sounds sensible to me, Lee, that it all would be in the one place. But one thing that I think is going to be kind of critical here to making sure that this, particularly when we talk about like interfacing with Lowry, is not necessarily just having the sandbox, not just in terms of interfacing with Lowry, but interfacing with a designer who's working with Lowry and the new theme team, right? Is having a live instance that we're sort of, you know, putting the content into, in addition to it being in code, so that we have kind of like a, you know, a running instance somewhere that we can all kind of look at as our touch point, and that we're like literally adding the content into it as it gets added to the issues. Then the people who are working on the theme have a place to go and sort of kind of get a sense of how it's all coming together. It's kind of one place where where people who are more visual can, like myself and others, can sort of visualize the thing sort of falling into place.
Yeah, I can ask around at work whether we can provide a site for that, because I mean, we could use simplytest.me, but obviously it only lasts for 30 minutes or 24 hours if you signed in. So if we had something a little bit less transient, that would be worthwhile.
Yeah, and something that we could sort of kind of go back and forth with on configuration as well, I think is like handy, rather than having to sort of have the configuration be in YAML and then reinstall the whole thing every time. You know what I mean? It's like a playground.
I mean, the standard process for working on an install profile is that you can burn it at any time and it should come back to where you're up to. So I think that it's dangerous if you start, you know, having to rely on a canonical database.
I totally understand what you're saying. I'm not saying that the database that's online would be the canonical one. I'm saying it would be the kind of playground one, and we could blow it away as long as we knew that all the content was in the other one. But it's the place where you can sort of, like you said, the simplytest.me is like, you know, you've got to, it takes time to spin the thing up, and it's kind of a pain in the ass. So we could sort of, if we had one that we could blow it away periodically, like, you know, every couple of days or so, but that we didn't have to keep spinning one up every single time we wanted to kind of look at it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. All right. So, so the last item that you added, Lee, was Sprint.
Right. So Drupal South is next week. So that's the biggest Drupal camp for Australia, New Zealand. So there's a sprint day on Wednesday that Previous Next are putting on, and I think that some of the issues in this queue would make good tasks for new contributors, and I'm interested in working on it myself anyway. So, I mean, you know, anyone who's comfortable site building can obviously jump in with many of these stories and, you know, export their config to YAML and create a patch. So that's why I was kind of keen to get some yay or nay consensus out of Thursday's meeting, because I'd hate to be wasting people's time but from what I'm hearing, it sounds like there's, you know, probably enough buy-in to at least go down that path and have something for people to look at.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's wasting their time. I think the biggest question is, do we do this in contrib first and then do it in core later when it's ready? That would be the only thing that I could see potentially. Like if people aren't comfortable with iterating on an installed profile, given that it hooks itself into different subsystems, like the module extension system or whatever, you know what I mean? Like that would be the one blocker, is we might need to do a cycle of innovation and contrib first. But regardless, I think having a demo content profile that matches our documentation and that, you know, like we can use as like a, you know, a demo and, you know, videos and other things that we're doing. I think there's absolutely no risk to working on that.
Yeah, sounds good.
You don't.
I agree completely. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
All right, well, that's great. And also it's worth pointing out that these tasks also these stories would make good tasks for Google Coding, which is coming up soon, and signed up as a mentor and sort of had some chats with Matthew about their viability for tasks, and he seems to think that, yeah, that'd be worthwhile as well. So that's also something we could crowdsource some assistance.
That sounds great. So one thing is that we should probably do, though, before this sprint. So you said the sprint is next week, 26th and 28th, it looks like?
Yeah, the sprint's on Wednesday, the 26th, yeah.
Okay, so after this meeting next week. So maybe like a goal would be by this time next week, or, you know, whenever the other scheduled meeting is. It's flipping times every other week. But to try and have that content model pretty well done, because that way people can be like, here's the spec, go do it, as opposed to, I could see as spending half the day, you know, rehashing the conversation.
Yeah. So we have issues in the sandbox for the model as it stood. I've revised it during this call to include that organization change that we spoke about.
Oh, great.
Already. So yeah, I think that I agree. We'll just keep it in sync with that document. And there's an issue that Kevin already created to finalize the content model, and I added the link to that document. So I think if we could get that issue to RDBC, then we could revise the other issues in light of that, and then have something fixed for people to work on.
Sweet.
Sounds great. This is awesome. I'm very excited.
Yeah, me too. Drupal South is really early this year, isn't it? It seems like normally that's in February or something.
Yeah, we didn't have one at all earlier in the year, so it's actually 18 months since the last one.
Oh, shit. Okay.
The one in Melbourne. Yeah.
Cool. So I think, given that we've covered just about everything on the agenda and everything, and everybody seems to be, you know, on the same page, I could give you 5 minutes of your time back. I'd be happy to get 5 minutes of my time back.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, thanks everyone for their time.
Awesome.
That's
Thanks,
great.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good morning,
Bye-bye.
afternoon.